Hello there. Welcome to my show, COVID-19 update by Heerak for Saturday, July 18, 2020. Yes, it's deja vu because right now July is kind of like uh, it's kind of like April. You know what I mean? Um, June is kind of like March. Some places start shutting down. So it's like deja vu. Um, yeah. But sadly, I want to remember J.I. Packer, who passed away yesterday. He's a world famous theologian, evangelical theologian from England. He's an English theologian. And J.I. Packer is famous for his book, Knowing God. If you haven't read that book, it's a classic. So I would encourage you to read that book. And as you know, um, one of the essential points of evangelical Christianity is that everybody's not God's children, in the sense that not everybody goes to heaven. So we call that Christian exclusivism, meaning you need to believe in Jesus Christ in order to go to heaven. You need to be baptized of uh, water and spirit to go to heaven. And obviously, this is something that evangelicals agree with, Catholics agree with, Orthodox Christianity in Greece and Russia, they agree with. Um, and mainline Protestants, many of them agree with as well. Churchgoers, most of the churchgoers in mainline Protestant denominations like United Methodist Church, Presbyterian Church USA, they're very conservative. Um, so some say the clergy in mainline are liberal, but the churchgoers are conservative. They're kind of like evangelicals. Um, so yeah, it's kind of interesting. So that's why people say America's Christianity is mostly evangelical, regardless of what main church that they go to. United Methodist, Southern Baptist, Assemblies of God, Presbyterian Church USA. Church members tend to be very conservative. And America is a very conservative country. It always was from the very beginning. And so socially, culturally, we're a very conservative country. We've always been since the very beginning. And that's not going to change. There are certain social expectations that we have, and certain social prejudices that we have, and we call that historical prejudices. You know, um, that will not go away. Kind of like, you know, uh, anti-abortion concepts. It transcends generations in America. So Generation Z are just as anti-abortion as Generation Y, Generation X, millennials, boomers. So there's a consistent unity among America's Christians. 90 More than 90% of America is Christian. So America's Christians that life is important, and abortion is wrong. And so if you ask most Democratic politicians, they will say that they personally believe that abortion is wrong. And some of them may even admit publicly that they believe abortion is killing a baby. Uh, but they kind of compromise because they want political power, and they have this mistaken notion that they'll get it by supporting abortion. Unfortunately, that's why voting Democrat uh, kind of makes you into like an anti-Christian. It used to be that Democratic Party had candidates who were pro-abortion and anti-abortion. So you can vote Democrat um, and not be guilty. But now, Democratic Party is so compromised. It's difficult to vote Democrat. I've talked to a lot of Catholics, Irish Catholics, who used to always vote Democrat, but because the Democratic Party is now officially like party of baby killing, abortion, uh, they vote against it because they don't want to go to hell. They don't want to be part of killing a baby, or many babies. So that's the trend right now among believing Catholics, and obviously, that's the right thing to do. I remember going to a pro-life movement at Georgetown, um, and they're like they don't like President Trump. Um, only people who really like President Trump are evangelical Christians. Every other ethnic group or religious group don't like President Trump. So for some reason, Mormons don't like him, Catholics don't like him, but evangelicals like President Trump. But lucky for President Trump, evangelicals are the majority in America, something like 200 million Americans. So that's why he's kind of lucky. you know. Um, yeah, but yeah, and so it's sad that America's Democratic Party has become such an anti-Christian party, and that's why Hillary lost. If the Democratic Party were unified and solidified, then Hillary would have won. But a lot of Democrats voted against Hillary, maybe because she mouthed off about pro-choice and gay marriage, and it's turned a lot of Americans off. Because the majority of Americans are very conservative, so they may not say something in public, but they are very conservative privately or among their friends, with whom they can be honest with. So you're gonna rub American people the wrong way if you're very liberal. Um, and so I knew Hillary was going to lose. She kept pushing gay marriage and abortion. Just turns everybody off. Majority of Irish Catholics don't like abortion. They actually consider it murder. And when they're voting, they kind of swallow the pill and vote Democrat. Many of them, they feel guilty about voting because they have a conscience. I'm predicting that in 2020 they will vote against Joe Biden because of his abortion position. It's baby killing is baby killing. You can't escape, realizing that. So even Generation Z, a lot of the Generation Z don't like abortion, regardless of whether they're religious or not, because they study science, and science says babies have heartbeat after several weeks. In basically in the first trimester. So Generation Z, they study all this in science class, and they know that having a heartbeat is having a life, so they don't want to kill a baby. So Generation Z may be the most anti-abortion generation in America's history, because they want to protect life, whether it's plants, a lot of environmentalists among Generation Z. So whether they want to protect life, uh, of plants, or whether they want to protect the life of animals, um, they want to protect life, and that's part of the environmentalist movement. So it's hard to find people who are like really environmentalists who support abortion. Yeah. So you know, yeah. I mean, it's you know, um, because human beings are rational beings, and so human beings don't like to be irrational. So if they're like saying things like, we want to protect endangered species, we want to protect the trees, we want to protect the ocean and all the living forms in ocean, it's hard for them to kind of turn around and say, well, we don't want to protect unborn babies, because human beings are rational beings. So if they start arguing about protecting the environment, there's a kind of a logical deduction or parallelism that will kind of compel them to support protecting unborn baby life, and so unfortunately for the liberal movement and for Democrats, at least from their perspective, you're on the way out, because ironically, Democrats support the environment, and that creates an emphasis on protecting life forms, and that translates into unborn babies. And that's why so many people in Generation Z and Generation Y are against abortion. Um, Far more than Generation X, baby boomers, because Generation X and baby boomers were not that into environment. Some were, but not everybody. But the younger generation, because those who are interested in the environment among Generation X have been emphasizing. So that's been kind of rubbing off on Generation Z. So you're probably expecting Generation Z to be far more intolerant of like abortion activists, and that's the irony, because um, liberal progressives don't understand how the ideas that they propagate come back to destroy them, and that's the irony of history. Sometimes people teach certain things and they don't think about the ramification of that or the long-term effects, or what I would call the domino effects. You put one domino, and then dominoes fall, and then at the end, the last domino tips over a spoon that hits a lever that you know drops a bucket full of water on somebody. Um, so liberal progressive, they just look at the first domino that they're making fall. They don't look at the bucket of water that's going to fall on that person. So that's what happened to Hillary Clinton in a sense. And that's why I honestly do not see any way Biden can win. Um, but secondly, because and I don't think Biden will choose a black woman, because Biden knows that he's going to lose if he chooses a black woman as his vice president running mate. And the fact that Joe Biden will not choose a black woman to be his vice president running mate shows a lot about America. Because if the most liberal person in the most liberal party, representing the most liberal movement, doesn't think that he can win the presidency with a black running mate, that means blacks have no power in America. Um, and ironically, more than anything that President Trump can ever say or do, that one decision by Joe Biden not to have a black running mate is the greatest argument for why you should align yourself with black power. That's It's the tragedy of the black people in America, that white liberals who want their vote do not want their alliance. Um, just watch President Trump. President Trump, he sticks to his ideology, right? He likes white power, white nationalism, so he chooses a white male to run. It's probably a very good decision, because white women, studies show, prefer to vote for white men than white women. So a lot of white women voted for Trump, not Hillary, which is a commentary on the mirage of the feminist movement in America. Feminist movement tries to present itself as powerful, but they're actually powerless. And 2016, presidential candidate, election showed us how powerless the feminist movement in America is. Because, I mean, how many women can you find in America who's more qualified than Hillary Clinton? Let's be honest here. Even Elizabeth Warren is probably not as qualified as Hillary Clinton in terms of experiences, um, and I mean, she was the first lady. She was the Secretary of State. She's a lawyer, went to Yale Law School, which is like #1 law school in America. Um, at least the hardest to get into, harder than Harvard to get into. And she represented women power. She was like embodiment of women power. And if Hillary Clinton cannot become president, then most feminist women realized, as well as non-feminist women, as well as Black people, as well as white people, as well as Hispanic people, that women's movement really doesn't have any power. And so 2016 election was a social commentary on how powerless American women are. Because if they had any power in political sense of the term, they should have had no problem getting Hillary Clinton elected. But because they don't have any power, power meaning tangible power, right? And political power means getting the person that you want elected, right? That's how political power is seen, at least in terms of elections. They couldn't get Hillary Clinton elected because women in America have no power. And so Joe Biden understands this, and that's why he hasn't announced his running mate yet, because he doesn't want to choose a Black woman as his vice presidential candidate. And that's the tragedy, of the Black people in America. White Democrats use them for getting votes, but they don't want to align themselves with them. We saw during the Democratic primaries how white Republican candidates, or white Democratic candidates made regulations to essentially block Black candidates out of the debates. Because had they been able to debate, and Kamala Harris is a very good debater. There are a lot of different people who debate really well. Tulsi Gabbard is very good at debating. Had they been able to debate every time all the way to the end, things might have been different, and so it's kind of like rigging an election, right? When you do it the way they did it. Which is unfortunate because there's no law that says you can't have like 10 primary individuals running, right? I mean, who created a law that says, you only have to have 2 people running for primaries, right? You could have 10, 15 people running in the primaries. And then people can vote for whoever they like, and whoever has the most votes will win. I mean, that's more of a democratic process. It's more fair. But Democratic Party wanted to rig it from the beginning. And that shows, what the Democratic Party leadership is thinking. They don't think that Black people can win. Or that's the perception they have now in year 2019 to 20. That's why they made regulations to block out the Black people from the debates, right? Decisions that leadership makes is highly illustrative of their perception about themselves, their perceptions about their fellow teammates. So Kamala Harris is like a fellow teammate. Senator Cory Booker from New York is a fellow teammate. But creating a policy to block all of them out in the early stages of Democratic debate shows, how they want to play. right? It's kind of like when you play a game, there are people that they bench, right? So in a sense, it was a form of benching um, that they orchestrated because they kind of looked at the social determinants of politics and they created regulations that they expected to happen, which would result in elimination of candidates of color or man of color, like Cory Booker. And so it's sad, I would say, because you should give everybody an opportunity, but that did not happen. And and Joe Biden is not going to choose a black woman to run with him. He may not even choose a woman. You know, politicians lie all the time, right? So I don't know. Let's see. Joe Biden hasn't announced who he's running with. Is this already July? It's kind of like one who hesitates is lost. Have you heard that saying? Hesitancy itself says a lot, about what they are thinking, right? Why are they hesitating, right? I mean, let's say, I'm talking to a guy out there. Let's say you propose to a woman and there's like a silence for like a long time. What does that say to you? Um, you know, and so, Joe Biden not choosing a running mate actually says something about his perception about America, how Joe Biden perceives America, how the Democratic Party perceives America. And it seems like Democratic Party doesn't think that a black woman vice presidential candidate can help Joe Biden win. And that's the perception I think majority of Americans are getting now. So in a sense, Joe Biden probably has done more damage to the perception of America in terms of um, electability at the national level of women who are black than Trump ever could, with all the negative comments he made, uh, you know. And so that's the irony of politics, because people are rational beings. They look at things and they make rational decisions, right? Rational assessments. You cannot control the way people think. People will think what they want to think. They will do what they want to do. You cannot control people. And I know that there are totalitarian impulses among Democrats as well as some Republicans, but you cannot force people to do what you want because people are autonomous beings and they are free. And so when you try to force people to do something that you want them to do, and you start pressing your power against them, the adverse effect of that kind of prescription is something that you may not have expected. There are things that can happen. There are triggers that can trigger events that you cannot even begin to imagine. And obviously, I want to warn all the police officers in the United States of America, because I think this is the right time to do it. As I mentioned, during a George Floyd protest, I think on May 25th episode or May 26th episode, you can watch my episode. If you arrest a Christian pastor for worshiping in defiance of your state law or your city law that forbids them from worshiping, God's going to get angry because they're worshiping God. So, God can trigger an event that could be far worse than what you saw during George Floyd protests. I'm just warning you because, as I mentioned before, God is a jealous God. He likes worship. if you get in the way of people worshiping God, He's gonna act. And we see that in the Bible. And I don't want you to get hurt, or your children to get hurt, your wife to get hurt, And so, who knows what's going to happen, right? Who knows? It could be a different angry mob. It may not be the African Americans. It could be the Hispanic Americans. We don't know. I mean, you know, uh, different things trigger different populations, right? I mean, Black Americans are like 10%. Hispanic Americans are like, what, 12, 13%? Most Hispanic Americans did not protest because it wasn't their issue. It was Black issue, right? A Black man, was killed, and it's about police killing Black men. You never hear of Hispanic Americans saying, "Ooh, police mistreat us." I mean, how many times have you heard Hispanics say, "Police profile us, police mistreat us"? That's not a Hispanic problem. So 13 million Americans who are Hispanic, um, they don't have a problem with the police per se. They don't have their children getting shot to death by police. That's not an issue with the Hispanic population. So a lot of Hispanics did not protest during George Floyd protests, obviously because it's not their ethnic issue. 13 million Hispanics in America do not suffer at the hand of the police. It's just, or do they think? They don't perceive that. They don't think that they suffer at the hand of the police. And perception is everything, right? Whether it's true or not, if you perceive it in a certain way, then you're going to act on that perception. So reality, to a certain extent, is relative and even non-consequential. Because it doesn't matter what the facts are, perception dictates action. And that's something that historians have talked about a lot. And so it could be that police officers do not mistreat Blacks, but that's irrelevant because the perception is that police mistreats Blacks. So that's why the violence was national, because that perception is ubiquitous. It's like the zeitgeist among the Blacks. And they're only 10% of the population, so 90% are not Black. So most of the 90% support the police, obviously. I know most Koreans love the police. Most Koreans are afraid of Black people because they have, like grocery stores or liquor stores, often in African American neighborhoods. So when they get robbed by African Americans. So most Koreans that I know are definitely afraid of like being robbed by African Americans. So they love the police, especially white police officers. So I know that that's true for Koreans. I think that may be the case for Chinese as well, Vietnamese. Probably similarly the case for Hispanics, because Hispanics, their suffering is not like the Black suffering. Blacks suffer, Hispanics also suffer, Asians suffer, we suffer, Koreans suffer. But most of the Korean suffering in America has been at the hand of the Black people. So, so most Asians, most Koreans who were killed in America were killed by Black robbers robbing their store, or carjacking them on their way to their store. So the Koreans generally live in the suburb and they have their businesses in the city. So for Koreans, they would say in terms of immigration experience, the greatest suffering is being robbed by Black people. That's what a lot of Koreans would say. And I've heard Koreans say that, shop owners. I've never owned a shop, grocery store. I started a learning center, but learning centers are generally in affluent white neighborhoods, because you need people to pay for your services, right? Tutoring services or education services, and rich people have money to do that. Poor people don't. So but like grocery stores or liquor stores, a lot of them, Koreans, they have it in like inner city neighborhoods. So suffering is different for different people, or trauma is different for different people. So Black trauma, experienced or imagined or perceived, is at the hand of the police. And that's been a perception for the longest time. Korean trauma has been at the hand of, let's say, robbery, armed robbery in their place of business mostly. And that's been by Black people mostly, because Korean businesses are in Black neighborhoods. Um, Hispanic Americans, obviously their experience is different, from Korean and um, Black experience. But, Koreans are less than, 1% of America's population, obviously. Um, Black people are 10%, Hispanics are 13%. Majority of Americans are white people. Like, over 60% are white in America. And there's a shared experience among white people in America that's probably very different from the kind of experience you have in Washington, D.C. or New York City. These two areas are very multicultural, but majority of white neighborhoods are not multicultural. And suburbanization of America, which happened in every city, every state, is considered a white flight from Black people. So when you want to understand the white majority, you cannot ignore the white flight into suburbs. But as a sociologist, you cannot ignore it, right? Whatever your value system doesn't really matter when you're trying to assess what the reality is. You see what I'm saying? Because people have different value systems and people have different perceptions. Why do Koreans love the police? Because they feel like the police can protect them if there's a robbery. Because a lot of Koreans are shop owners, right? Small business owners. So that's why, the experiences are very different. The way individuals are perceived are very different based on individual experience, but more importantly on the group level, group experience. So white Americans, over 60%, perceive things vastly differently from the way, let's say, Washington establishment experiences things or New York establishment experiences things. That's not America. Majority of the white America is very white America. So, and, sometimes people in Washington, D.C. forget that because they're like in a very multicultural area. All the embassies are here. Or in New York, which is just that's, like Ellis Island, that's where the immigrants arrive. But majority of America is not like that, and I think white Americans sometimes are confused by the actions of politicians, both Republicans and Democrats, because it doesn't jive with their perception and experience in their own neighborhoods, in their communities. And I think like Republican senators like Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, they're not gringos. I mean, they're white. You look at them, they look white, but they're Hispanic, right? They're Latino. So they don't necessarily understand white America. I think Senator Cruz is married to like white American, but there's so much you could share because culture is not so much about didactic education. Culture is a lived experience, unspoken lived experience, So unless you're from that culture, it's hard to explain it, whether you're Korean, Black, Hispanic, gringo, white. And so I think, to a certain extent, there are differences. I'm Korean American, so there are things that I will never know or understand about gringos, the way, Senator Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, Senator Rubio will never understand. But that's fine. I mean, Senator Cruz is in an area where there's a lot of Latinos in Texas. Senator Marco Rubio is in Florida where there are a lot of Latinos. So, it's a mixture of whites and Latinos, and so it works, Yeah, I mean, it's just understanding what motivates people. It's very different. So if you assume that you're right, you're probably wrong. And I would say that for white people in Washington, D.C., and that's why most of the country call Washington, D.C. white establishment or Washington swamp, because they don't agree with it. So I would say, 60 to 70% of white people in America, they do not agree with Washington swamp. And so you got to be very careful, because you could alienate yourself from the masses, because Washington is not America. And I think that's something that people who are in Washington, D.C. do not understand. Um, yeah, and that's why we have like these shifts, right? You have the Tea Party movement coming into power. You have President Trump being elected when he's not establishment. You have these shocking events that don't make logical sense to Washington insiders, because they're Washington insiders. They don't understand America and what is real in America, because they're in Washington, D.C., where there's a wheeling and dealing and multiculturalism. This is not America. This is Washington, D.C. Um, yeah, and I think that's going to be impactful during the election year, 2020. As I said, President Trump does not need a single black vote or a single Hispanic vote or a single Asian vote to win the presidency. Obviously, if he loses enough white vote, he's not going to win. Yeah, because if whites don't get enthusiastic to come out and vote for you, you're not going to win, right? Yeah, so it's like that. Like Arlington, although we have 100 nationalities, over 60% of Virginia's 8th district is white. Which is ironic because Fairfax County is like the most Asian area in Virginia. So how do we have a situation where you have 60% of Virginia's 8th district being white? But this is America. Do you see what I'm saying? If it's 60% white in Arlington County, Alexandria, Falls Church, and Fairfax County, can you imagine the demographic composition in rest of America? Yeah. So I think people lose touch with that, the reality. Yeah, people don't think like you. People in Washington, D.C., you are like alone in America. People do not think like you. Yeah. But anyway, more Americans think like J.I. Packer, because, majority of Americans are evangelical Christians. So they kind of think like that. Jesus Christ is God. He's the way to salvation. There's a Christian exclusivism that is very strong among Catholics, Protestants, and Orthodox Christians throughout all 50 states. And that's something that Washington Swamp cannot relate to, because in Washington, D.C. is like a fictional reality. It's a fictive reality. It's not real, right? It's like politicians concentrated. I mean, it's not a real world. Washington, D.C., wheeling, dealing, getting along, get along to, you know, it's not like that in the rest of America. Yeah. Um, now, we have about 1,000 deaths every day. So 30 days from now, you're going to have like 30,000 deaths. So we have 140,119 deaths today. Today is what, July 18th? By August 18th, you're going to have 30,000 more. We're going to have about 170,000 at the current rate. Obviously, more people are going to die because hospitals are going to run out of space. And, all these cases that we see, they're going to eventually end up in deaths, a lot of them. So we're going to see the acceleration of death rate. And that's happening already. Texas, they went from like teens death to now they're like over 170 deaths, per day. So, it's going to eventually skyrocket. And it seems like, that's happening, not just in Texas, but Arizona, Florida, and other states. And Georgia is beginning to pick up. So you're looking at a very bad situation right now, which is unfortunate. Yeah. Um, yeah. So let's look at the numbers from United States, the top 5 states, and you see the disturbing trend. It has completely changed. It used to be New York number one and New Jersey number two in terms of cases. But now New York is still number one with 406,305 cases. Death is 32,478. So there's an 8% death. But California's cases are catching up to New York. So we have 380,745 cases. But you got to remember, majority of those cases started happening like a couple of weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago. So eventually the death rate will sharply rise. So the death rate is currently at 2% because second peak started 2-3 weeks ago. It wasn't long ago. But once the death rate starts catching up, the 2% will eventually go to like 4%, 5%, and maybe even up to 8% or higher if the hospitals run out of beds. So that's kind of expected to happen. Florida is number 3 at 337,569 cases. And, like California, its cases started, 2-3 weeks ago. So their death rate is at like 1%. And so they have about 4,895 deaths. I mean, it's not a small amount. I mean, that's a lot of people, but the death rate is at a little bit above 1%, but you round it down to 1%. But it's expected to rise, probably rise to like 4 to 5% or higher. Yeah, so you will see that in the coming weeks. So unfortunately, coming weeks will be marked by a lot of deaths. So you know how in the past 2-3 weeks we've been talking about how high the new cases are. In the coming weeks, we're going to eventually shift the discourse to talk about how many people are dying. You will see that happen. Number 4 is Texas, and that's 327,106 cases. And their death is at 1%. As I said, just like Florida, they start spiking only 2-3 weeks ago. So the people who got COVID, they're still, it's getting worse, but it's, it's time. So the death will spike soon, probably relatively soon, a week or 2 weeks. You will see a sharp spike. And so currently it's at 3,939. It's going to sharply spike. Probably California, Florida, Texas will all quickly go past 10,000 deaths. They may even hit 30,000 deaths before August. We don't know. Let's see. I think they will sooner than end of August. But let's see what happens. It's still relatively soon. Death rate is like kind of incline right now. But it's like any kind of exponential growth. It goes like this, and at a certain point, it's going to hit it, and it's going to go straight up. So that's what you have to watch out for. That point in exponential growth that they hit, where it just goes up sharply up. And that's what happened with California, Florida, and Texas with cases, right? At first, it was like a couple thousand, and then suddenly went up to 10,000, then 15,000, So death is going to mirror that. So you're going to see that in a week or so, where death just suddenly spikes up, like week to 2 weeks. So that's my prediction. Let's see if I'm correct. And New Jersey is number 5. They haven't really been having too many cases, New York and New Jersey. But eventually it's going to go there because I've been following the Pennsylvania figures, and they've been around 800. So Pennsylvania is in second peak. So eventually New Jersey is going to get there where they have like 800 cases. Eventually, New York's going to go there, and then depending on the circumstances in these states, they may have their own spikes, like Florida. So New York is susceptible to that. It happened once, it could happen again. California kind of had a spike in the beginning, and then it's now having a second spike. California managed to avoid what happened in New York. Let's see what happens in the second peak. Yeah, so that's where we are in terms of COVID-19 cases and deaths. As you know, I'm in the clinical nurse leader program at Georgetown University. It's a 2-year program. I started in 2018 with 34 people in my cohort. And 2 years later, we're finishing our program in August. And, there's like 25 of us, including myself. 3 men, Billy from Texas, Grant from South Carolina, or North Carolina, he's in South Carolina now, and Heerak, I'm an immigrant from Korea, and then 22 women. One of the things that we focused on is population health, and we kind of focused on it the whole year during second year with Professor Lorraine Spencer. So she taught us the class, and she was my clinical instructor. And there are 3 things that you have to understand about population health, whether it's returning combat veterans, or whether it's Black people, white people, Hispanic people, Asian people, Native American people. There are 3 types of preventions, and that's primary prevention, secondary prevention, and tertiary prevention. So the primary prevention is there's no disease. So you're trying to prevent people from getting the disease. So if you don't have COVID, if you have good enough primary prevention, you're not going to get COVID. So obviously that's the most ideal stage, primary prevention. Now, obviously, if you don't want to get diabetes, you have to eat very small amount of food, just enough, and you have to exercise, then you're not going to get diabetes. But it's hard to do that because food is tasty. I love food. I love eating food. And exercising is a lot of work. I hate jogging. So some people, I like that too. In which case you could get diabetes or other conditions. But you can stop yourself from getting a diabetes condition if you eat healthy, mostly fruits and vegetables, and small amount of it, and you exercise. It's hard to do though. Now, in terms of COVID-19, primary prevention is getting vaccinated, but there's no vaccine, so that's not going to help you. Other ways of primary prevention, obviously this is a pandemic, is you got to stay away from people who are infected. But it's like any infection, right? Cold, flu, chickenpox. You have to stay away from people who have COVID. So if you don't have COVID, then the most important thing you need to know is who has COVID, and you have to stay away from that person, right? Then you're probably not going to get it. You have to be around people who have COVID to get COVID. Having said that, if you stay at home, obviously you're not going to encounter people who have COVID. And that's why in April, we saw a sharp drop of COVID-19 cases in America because people were staying at home. If you're staying at home, you're not going to get COVID because you're at home. You need people to get COVID. So if you're at home, you're not going to get COVID. You said how that works? So that's a form of primary prevention, staying at home, not going outside unless you absolutely have to. That's one way to ensure that you don't get COVID. So the quickest way to drop COVID in any state or city is to ensure that everybody's staying at home. Because as long as everybody's staying at home, you can reduce new cases of COVID maybe even down to zero. You cannot reduce COVID to zero with a mask because no mask is 100% foolproof. So if you're talking to people, you're gonna get COVID even if you have masks on. I mean, you're not definitely gonna get it, but you have a chance to get it. So everybody wearing a mask will not stop COVID from growing for 3 reasons. Number one, your mask doesn't fully protect you even if you wear it correctly. Number two, you're not going to wear your mask correctly, which means you're going to have a higher chance of getting COVID. Majority of the people do not wear the mask correctly. It has to be the right size. Even if it's the right size, you have to fit it. Like whenever I go to grocery store, I see a lot of people and they're not wearing their mask correctly. So they're wearing the mask, but they're going to get COVID if they talk to people from close range. Because they're not wearing it correctly, so their mask is not fully protecting them. So let's say you have a mask that protects you 40%. I've seen a lot of people who wear a mask in a wrong way, so that mask that they're wrongly wearing will only protect them 10%, 15%. So if you talk to people at a close range, even if you have masks on, you'll get COVID. And that's why I say if you go to church, just face the front. Everybody just face the front and sing. Don't turn around. Because if you turn around when somebody's singing, you could get it. But if everybody's facing the front, then you're singing, all your spit and COVID particles, if you have it, is hitting person's head. And you could go home and take a shower and it's fine. You're not going to get COVID from people just singing into your head, back of your head, So, yeah, that's assuming that it's droplet. Droplet means, particles go and it drops onto the floor. If it's airborne, then it could linger in the air. But, scientists are not sure whether it's droplet or airborne. Most scientists say it's droplet. We don't know. Unfortunately, it's a question mark. Yeah, so it's a question mark. But I would argue, if you go to church, just face the front when you sing. Don't turn around. Then you should be fine. And try to keep 6 feet away. Maybe have one aisle empty. So you're standing on this aisle. You have one aisle empty. Then the next aisle, you have a group of people. Then you probably won't get COVID at church, right? As long as you're facing the front, you're not turning around when you sing. If it's droplet precautions, it's airborne, it could still linger. So it could present different set of cases. But a lot of people who went to church haven't got COVID because people have been going to church for a long time. So obviously, if you take precautions, you're not going to get COVID. If it's a droplet precaution, all you have to do is stay 6 feet away. Droplet's going to drop 6 feet later. So as long as you have 6 feet distance, you can sing what you want. Yeah. So, because the governors and mayors are ignorant, they're trying to prevent people from going to church. That's not necessary, really. As long as you can maintain a proper distance, as long as you're not facing each other, face to face, as long as you have your head behind you, facing the person behind you. There's no opening in your head, back of your head. You're not going to get COVID. Somebody talks into your head or spits on your head. Don't do it at close range, but near 6 feet later, it's hard to get it, COVID. If it's droplet precautions, and not airborne. So, that seems to be the consensus right now. Majority of the people think it is air droplet and not airborne. But as I said, nobody's certain. So in life there's always risk. So you take the risk if you think the risk is worth it, right? Um, so in terms of primate prevention, that's why I support President Trump in not requiring masks of everyone. That's just ridiculous. Requiring everybody to wear a mask is waste of money for people who don't live in areas where there aren't that many COVID, or there are areas in America where there's zero COVID. You don't have to wear a mask. If you live in a town where nobody has COVID, as long as outsiders don't come into your town, you're never going to have COVID. Only way you're going to have COVID in your town is if somebody from the outside world comes into your world. That's the only way you're going to have COVID. So requiring wearing a mask nationally, that's just stupid, especially because mask does not protect you 100%. No mask that we know protects you 100%. And just because you require people to wear a mask, that doesn't mean they're going to wear the mask properly. So as I said, I go to like Giant when I shop, and I see like majority of the people are not wearing their mask properly. In which case, if they talk at close range, they'll get COVID, even with the mask they're wearing. So that's why I think it's stupid to require wearing masks by state law, because how are you going to make sure everybody's wearing the mask correctly, right? Number one. Number two, different people have different types of masks. So how are you going to, just because someone's wearing a mask doesn't mean that person's not going to infect you. Because he could be wearing a homemade mask where there's a lot of openings that are not readily visible, where when he speaks, his particles are going to go out. We don't know. So just wearing a mask is not going to reduce COVID-19 significantly. It may reduce a little bit, but I would argue, probably Dr. Fauci would agree with me, wearing a mask will not be helpful if everybody's talking to each other wearing a mask. Meaning, you wear a mask and you stay 6 feet away, it provides a second layer of protection for you, because if you're 6 feet away and if it is droplet, you're most likely not going to get it. And if you also wear a mask, it gives you a lot of protection. If you stay away 6 feet and you don't wear a mask and you wear a mask, it's going to help you a lot. But if you wear a mask and you start talking to someone who's wearing a mask from this close distance, you're probably going to get COVID. And I think Dr. Fauci would back me up on this one, Dr. Birx as well, and Dr. Who else is it? Dr. Hahn. I'm sure they will agree with me, because if you're not wearing the mask properly and you're talking close, you're going to get it. There's like 90% chance or more that you're going to get it if you're not wearing the mask properly. Because there's like a big gaping hole opening through which droplets can enter your mask. You're going to get it. You see what I'm saying? Droplet, you have to be 6 feet away for the droplet not to hit you, right? So even if you're wearing a mask, droplet will hit you. It will hit you in your face. It will hit you in your eyes. It will hit you in your hands. And if the person has been talking to you, you're not wearing a glove, right? And droplets hit your hand and you're like rubbing your eye with your hand or whatever, you're going to get COVID. For example, there's 1,000 other ways to get COVID. So requiring people wearing a mask, I think, is not helpful. Because if people are required to wear a mask, they think like, oh, I'm invincible. I'm not going to get COVID because I have a mask on. And that's just not true. And Dr. Fauci will back me up on this. Dr. Birx will back me up. Every scientist will back me up on this one. If you're not wearing a mask properly, if you talk closely to someone, like within 5-6 inches of each other, you're going to get COVID because you're not wearing a mask properly, and there's all this opening. Even if it's not airborne, you're going to get it. It's droplet, you're going to get it. So I would argue that even wearing a mask, and obviously you have to put the stipulation there. People are not wearing masks properly. A lot of people are not. Dr. Fauci hasn't walked around in shopping malls observing people like I have, probably. I don't know, maybe he has. But I always observe people to see if they're wearing their mask properly. You know, it's the training. You know, I'm clinical nurse leader trained at Georgetown for 2 years. So I'm like, you know, I have that clinical nurse leader training. Look, it's like police officers. They walk into a grocery store, they can't escape the fact that they're police officers. So if there's like something suspicious going on, they kind of look at it. You know, they have like eyes in the back of their head, these police officers. And it's kind of like that with nurses, you know. And so, yeah, so that's why I think it's absolutely stupid to have a law saying you have to wear a mask, because as I said, you know, people are not going to wear their mask properly. And the third thing, you know, reason why, you know, masks will be problematic, it's something that you have to remember, you know. Yeah, so do not think that wearing a mask will prevent you from getting the disease. Your mask will prevent you from getting the disease if you stay 6 feet away. If you are talking closer than 6 feet away from someone, even if you wear a mask, you can get it. Because COVID-19 stays on surfaces for 3 days, according to scientists. You know, they're not sure, but that's what they're theorizing. So if you're talking to people and they're talking to you, invisibly, they're like spitting all over you. The particles are going all over your body. So even if you don't get it while you're talking to them, your hand has COVID on it, your arm has COVID on it, your clothing has COVID on it, and you can rub your clothing. You know, even after you wash your hands, you could rub it again. You know, you're not going to be safe. So I think Dr. Fauci is just trying to encourage the American people, trying to give them hope. But you know, Heerak Christian Kim, independent candidate for U.S. Congress in Virginia's 8th District. That's who I am. I'm a realist. I prefer to have you live by giving you the facts. You know, I'd rather give you like the total fact than like kind of doctored fact, meaning like, yes, technically wearing a mask protects you, but there's so many factors. So in theory, yes, but in reality, no. And I think where Dr. Birx, Dr. Redfield, Dr. Hahn, Dr. Fauci go wrong is sometimes they stay in the theoretical route, maybe because they want to encourage the people. But I, Heerak Christian Kim, am a very practical person. Part of it is because of my training as a clinical nurse leader at Georgetown, which is a very good program. If you have a bachelor's degree and you want to help people, I encourage you to apply to that program. And I think deadline is like November. It's a good program. You know, you won't regret it. So because I'm well trained in that program, and this program emphasizes reality on the ground, that's why I'm being very practical about it. That's why I'm saying it's stupid to have a wear a mask policy. It's stupid because there are so many variables that it's going to make the society more unsafe, right? Because if you have people walking around without masks, then you're in alert, right? So you're going to be far more careful. And that alertness may be what saves your life. You see what I'm saying? If everybody's wearing masks because the law requires it, you have a false sense of safety and you're going to walk around talking to everybody. And that's how you're going to get COVID and die. So even from a public health perspective, it's better to have people walking around without masks to put the fear of God in you because they could infect you and you're going to try to stay 6 feet away. That level of alertness is needed. for you to live. It's like any war. If you're complacent or comfortable, you're going to die. Just ask any Marine in a war zone. The moment that you put your guard down is when you're going to get shot to death by your enemy. So that's why, Marines have post-traumatic stress syndrome, because their adrenaline is running, right? They're in a constant state of alert because that's the way you survive in a war zone. You have to look at COVID-19 as a war zone where you have to be in constant alert when you're around people outside, or you're going to get it. Like if you're at home, you could put your guard down, you're at home. It's like your home is your castle, you do what you want. Fly the Confederate flag, fly the Nazi flag, whatever, you do what you want, it's your home. You have the freedom to express yourself in your home. You have freedom of speech, freedom of expression. First Amendment protects you doing all that stuff. Your home is your home. So when you're at home, you don't have to be PTSD, traumatized. If you're at home, watch your TV, watch your movie, get an exercise bike and bike in your home, get a treadmill and walk the treadmill, get your exercise that way. You don't have to go to the gym. But it's less like a war zone because you're in your home. It's your home. It's safe. But the moment you step outside of your home, you're in a war zone. Because you could get COVID and die. Whether you die by a bullet or whether you die by COVID, death is death. And probably death by COVID may be more painful. It's like more prolonged pain than just by dying by one gunshot wound to your head. You see what I'm saying? So it may be more painful death, COVID. So not having a mask mandate, requiring people to wear masks, is actually the way to save people's lives. I think you should recommend people wear a mask and hopefully everybody wears a mask, but you know how the world is. Not everybody's going to wear a mask. But that's going to save you because you're going to see people walk around without a mask and you're going to be like, oh man. And you're going to be like careful and you're going to stay away. You need that reminder that death is around. So false sense of safety, I would argue, is much more dangerous than having everybody wear a mask. Because everybody wearing a mask will not save everybody, will not reduce COVID-19 spread in a community that much, unless everybody's wearing N95 mask and it's tightly sealed around your mouth, it's fitted and it's accurately worn. People wearing masks, you should assume is not that safe. You shouldn't be talking to people wearing masks. So I say every mayor, every governor should stop forcing a mask mandate. People don't have money. You're gonna charge them $50, ticket them. You're gonna like force police officers to ticket people. You're going to create all kinds of social problems by forcing people to wear a mask. They're already stressed out as it is. That's just not good public policy. Having a mask mandate is not a good public policy because you're stressing people out. You're creating mental illness, right? Because stress is a causative factor to mental illness. So by requiring everybody to wear a mask, you're creating mental illness. Stress creates mental illness, so don't stress people out by requiring them to wear a mask. All people have to do is stay 6 feet away from anyone who's not wearing a mask, if it's droplet, right? And people could do that if they want to live. We tell them what you need to do on TV, right? Stay 6 feet away, wear a mask. So if you see people who are not wearing a mask, don't just walk up and talk to them. Just stay away. Then you'll be fine. So Democrats seem to assume that everybody's an idiot. And they're like, they want people to wear a mask. If somebody's not wearing a mask, just stay 6 feet away. And if they try to walk closer to you, just keep moving back. Find an excuse and walk away. you got to find ways to survive COVID-19, right? And having a mask mandate is the worst possible public policy because it gives false sense of security. People do not know how to wear masks properly, and people are going to talk close to each other with masks on, which is going to spread COVID-19 more than if people don't have masks but they stay 6 feet away. You see what I'm saying? So don't think that if 100% of Americans wear a mask, this COVID is going to go away. Only way this COVID is going to go away is everybody stays at home. Obviously, that's impossible because you have to go out for food. But you could reduce it to near zero, and then it could potentially go to zero. As long as enough people are staying at home, and when you go outside, you're taking precautions. That's the only way, really, to reduce it to near zero or zero. And experts say even if you wear a mask, it will take 6 weeks for this to be reduced. Imagine 6 weeks of wearing a mask. You think everybody's going to wear a mask? And everybody's going to wear the mask properly? No. Yeah, so that's why I'm saying you got to close the schools down. Because if adults cannot wear masks properly, you think the kids will wear a mask properly? The moment they take off a mask, they get infected. If there's COVID-19 floating around, or if there are people who are speaking with COVID-19, just 1 second is all it takes. This is why I'm saying we need to close all the schools down to pre-K to 12th grade and colleges as well, and have online learning until we flatten the curve. We need to flatten the curve, right? I mean, just nobody's talking about flattening the curve anymore because the curve is so high. So right now, primary prevention is almost impossible at the community level. It's possible at an individual level because if you stay home and don't go out, then you're not going to get COVID. You prevented it. Now, obviously, secondary prevention is important as well. Knowing who has COVID will help us isolate that person from other people. And if you know who has it, if you have it, you can stay at home, thereby not infecting other people. So secondary prevention is subclinical disease, meaning you have it, but you could start taking it easy, eat more protein, get more rest, so you could recover better. It's like cold or flu. If you're active when you have cold or flu, it could last longer, and you may not recover. You could get pneumonia and die. But if you stay at home and you recover, you have a higher chance of recovering. You see, it's like any disease, right? So secondary prevention is good. Like secondary prevention is screening. You go and get COVID-19 tested. I encourage all of you to get tested. Because if you get tested and it's positive, but you don't feel any symptoms, the virus is already in your body. It's doing damage inside your body, you just don't feel it yet. But if you have a positive test, it's probably a good idea to take it easy, eat well, sleep more, get exercise that's not too strenuous, and then you can recover from it more easily. You don't have to necessarily die from COVID. That's why screening is important. Subclinical, it could help you survive, and because you're staying at home, you're not spreading it. But it's not as good as primary prevention. Now, tertiary prevention is you have the disease and you're getting treatment for it, right? Right now, the identified treatment is hydroxychloroquine, remdesivir. Those are kind of identified as possibly helping the cure. And glucocorticoid. But they're not 100% sure. All right. I mean, they're using it. They're saying it's kind of working. But it's tertiary. Obviously, the best treatment is a cure, but we don't have a cure. And no one really knows what COVID-19 is. So most likely, it's going to be hard to find the cure or vaccine. And that's the problem. But as you know, I am spiritually saying that this is COVID-19 is created by God. I mean, everything, obviously, everything is created by God. And he's using that to punish America for gay marriage or homosexuality. So I am saying it's better to spiritually solve this by legalizing homosexuality, giving God what he wants, as we can read in Romans chapter 1 and Deuteronomy and Leviticus. I think that's an easier and faster way to solve this problem. Obviously, Christianity believes that Christianity is the only true religion, and that there is no God but Christian God, is true. And so majority of America's 200 million Christians believe that Jesus is the only way. Like they believe that Islam is a false religion, Buddhism is a false religion, Judaism is a false religion, paganism is a false religion, Wiccan is a false religion. They say Christianity is the only true religion, and that's majority of Americans believe that. And that's why we have this saying, one nation under God. Because people believe that that America should be a Christian nation, one nation under God. And obviously, when Christians in America say one nation under God, they mean Jesus Christ. That's over 200 million Protestants and over 60 million Catholics believe this. Yeah, so this is America, As I say, if you don't like America, you can leave. But this is America, You don't have to stay in this country. Then you could immigrate to other countries if you're not happy here. But America is, we're a Christian nation. And Americans like the fact that America is a Christian nation. It's just, you're not going to change the way Americans think. If you want to live in a Jewish nation, you can go to Israel. It's a Jewish nation. If you prefer to live in a Muslim nation, you can go to Saudi Arabia. It's right there. Or even Indonesia, Saudi Arabia is a really comfortable place to live. Indonesia, not so much. But there are billionaires and millionaires there, too. You can live like a king. If you want to live in a Buddhist nation, you can go to like, Korea or Japan or Vietnam or Taiwan. Yeah, so you don't have to live in America if you don't want. But, this is a Christian America, and you just have to recognize that. And Americans, majority of Americans like the fact that this is a Christian America, whether they're Asian, Hispanic, Black, or white, majority like it. Yeah, so that's something they got to remember. And it's built into the Christian religion, right? Jesus himself said, I'm the only way to the Father. No one comes to the Father except through me. It's essential part of Christianity is Christian exclusivism, that you're only saved through Jesus. You can't change that. And, I think that that's something that Jews don't understand. Because Judaism, in its pure form, obviously is monotheistic, but American Jews, they don't really believe in Judaism. They call themselves Jews. They call themselves culturally Jewish, whatever the heck that means. I mean, I know what they're saying, but it doesn't make logical sense from a cultural studies angle, because there's no such thing as a Jewish food. I mean, there's Korean food, there's Japanese food, there's Chinese food. There is no Jewish food. Like everything that Jews say is Jewish food, that's like found in some other nation. It belongs to another nation. It's like national food of where Jews used to live, like Poland. So Jews really don't have their own food. So, I mean, how can you call yourself like a culture when you don't have your own food? You see what I'm saying? Yeah. But anyway, I mean, obviously I'm being stickler academic about it because the culture has to have certain markers, right? And all cultures have distinctive markers except Jewish, but what Jews call Jewish culture. They don't have distinctive markers. So it's not really a culture. I mean, you could say Judaism is a religion, obviously, because there people of different cultures can be part of the same religion. A religion only requires a belief system and set of practices. That's not necessarily tied to the culture. Um, yeah, but anyway, Jews have hard time understanding Christian America, and I think the flaw in not being able to understand America is part of them being wandering Jews. The term wandering Jews, they're in diaspora. This is not their land. It's not a Jewish homeland. And, they're product of their history. For 2,000 years, they've been persecuted by Christians in the West, and they'll probably keep persecuting them for the next 2,000 years. It's just that's how the relationship was defined from the very beginning. Jews persecuted Christians, and the Christians started persecuting Jews. And since Jews don't have the numbers, Jews will be persecuted by Christians because you have 2 billion Christians, only 12 million Jews around the world. So that power dynamics cannot change because it's always a numbers game, right? Numbers determine power. And so, I'm being simplistic about it, but there's high truth to that. Yeah, so I think Jews have a hard time understanding that America never can be pluralistic the way they think it could be. I think they don't understand it. It's just practically impossible. Meaning, we have 330 million Americans. Over 300 million are Christians, and they like being Christians. They don't want to change. Now, if you try to force them to change, they're going to get stressed out and they're going to hate you. Which means it's going to set America into motion of repetitions in history where Jews get persecuted, like openly and aggressively. Because if you keep stressing the majority out, they're going to retaliate eventually as a group, as the majority. And that's been the sad history of Jews for 2,000 years. You got to leave the majority alone if you don't want to be persecuted by them. But Jews never learn. For 2,000 years they've been doing the same thing with the same result, and they don't learn. So yeah, it's just tragic. I feel bad for them because I wish they learned from their mistakes as a people. But memory is short-lived because when you're born, it's not like you have the memory of people who died before you. You're new, so you look at things from your perspective, not from your ancestors' perspective. So you repeat the same mistakes that people like 3 generations ago made, because you're 3 generations removed. And that's the tragedy of history. People keep making the same mistake over and over again with the same exact result. But America is a Christian America, and people like the fact that America is a Christian America. That's one of the things that they really like about America. Like that is a one nation under God, meaning Jesus Christ. And obviously, if you're a true Christian, you like that idea. You don't want to be separated from that idea because you are a Christian. And it's built into the religion. Jesus is the only way to salvation. That's like built in to the Gospels itself. And I think like Jews don't understand that because they've been in the diaspora for 2,000 years. They don't understand how the Goyim, Gentiles, think. I think Muslims understand better, because they have their own land. There's like 1 billion Muslims. So you don't really see Muslims trying to change you the way you are. Because, they understand the dynamics, so you don't have a problem with Muslims like in Turkey, Turkish people in Germany. You don't have this kind of aggression. You don't have that kind of problem in most areas. It's just because Muslims, they have their home country, and they kind of are tied to their home country, you know. Uh, so even if they're American or British, they still have, you know, ties to their old country, you know, and that kind of is their reference point for their individual and group identity. So they don't feel the need to change the majority because they have a reference point with their own majority in another continent or another country. Um, so that's why you see different dynamics based on their experience, their home country, their history as a people for thousands of years. These all determine how people act. Obviously, Christians in the Western civilization has always been dominant majority since 325, Constantine the Great. So you're talking about 1,600 years of being the majority. It's not going to change the way they see themselves and the others in the world around them. It's not going to change. It's about 1,600 years of existence, mode of existence. And I think that's where the limitations of Jews are. They think they could change Christians. And I feel bad when I see Jews who honestly believe that. Like they're like believer in that idea that you could change the majority. I'm a historian, as you know, I'm an expert historian, trained in the PhD program at UCLA as a historian. And I've been a historian for decades. I've researched, I've published, I've presented papers. You cannot change the majority. It's just impossible. It's never been done. And like every generation of Jewish people for 2,000 years, they think they could do it. I don't know what to say because that's the reason why they get annihilated, you know? Um, but some of them, you have people who genuinely believe they could do it. That's the irony. You know, it's like that in every generation, there's some believer who think they could change the majority. And they come up with all kinds of academic argumentations and theories to support the idea that they could do it. You know, the latest thing is like social justice. Um, yeah, yeah, it's not gonna, because there are three things that prevents that. Number one is human nature. Humans always seek their self-interest. And for Christians, their self-interest is to maintain their dominance. Every organism wants to be dominant. And Jews are saying, give up your dominance. The dominant population will not give up their dominance. It's just biologically programmed into all living organisms. So you're never going to persuade the dominant group to give up their dominance because they're biologically wired to maintain their dominance. Do you see what I mean? Biological dictates will override any kind of academic ideas or philosophical movement, I think that's something that Jews don't understand. I'm talking about Jews because I'm an expert of Jews. I study Jews. I've been studying Jews for decades. I studied Jews with the top experts of Jews around the world at Harvard, at Brown University, at University of Pennsylvania, at UCLA in America, at Columbia, at Princeton. Well, at Columbia and Princeton, I did mostly library research, but I talked to like experts. In England, at Cambridge University, in Israel, at Hebrew University, like basically all the professors are Jewish. All the students are Jewish. France, Germany, you have to remember, like any kind of academic principle is a fictional creation. It's not real. So things that are academic are generally not actually true. They're like what I call constructs. Um, they're constructs meaning they are artificially created by intellectuals uh, for analysis, for discussion, but it's not reality. It's a fictional construct. So sometimes because academics spend so much time in academia, they even come to believe that it's real, but it's not real. It's a construct. Um, and you know, Jews make the mistake every time. And I say this as an expert analyst, historian, examining populations and making historical assessment on it. They make the same mistake every generation, which is weird, you know. But I guess that's what makes us biological beings. We have certain biological dictates, and I see that in biological terms, meaning there's a dominant group which has been dominant for what 1,700 years. Jews are the minority group, and they want to be dominant because all living organisms want to be dominant, right? That's what is distinctive about all living organisms. If it's a plant, plants try to be dominant. I don't know if you've studied plants. Plants develop all kinds of ways to become dominant in their ecosystem. Animals as well. If you've watched Nova programs, all animals try to try to expand their dominance. And that's what Jews are doing in a way, you know, they're basically obeying their biological dictate, which is to become dominant or try to become dominant. So I guess that provides a certain level of explanation because you have the dominant group that doesn't want to lose its dominance. So they're going to try to safeguard their dominance, whether they're conservative or liberal, it doesn't matter. It's about biological dictate. It's not about political ideology. Those who are dominant will try to maintain their dominance. It doesn't matter what they believe, what they affiliate themselves with in terms of political party system, whether they're educated or uneducated, it doesn't matter, right? They're gonna, that's the biological dictate. That's the, what I would call primary dictate. Um, and obviously Jews are obeying the biological dictate, but they're rationalizing it along different constructed realities or constructed discourses, right? But constructed is what the name implies or denotes. Constructed is fictional. It's fictive. There could be an element of reality in it, but it's not the reality itself. And when you mix reality and fiction, because construction is fiction, academia is all fiction. It's not, I mean, when I say fiction, meaning the reality is what you live and feel and sense with your senses. That's the reality. Fiction is you're trying to make sense of what you see and feel. So you create a story that maybe this is that way, maybe this that way, but it's fiction. But we call it nonfiction because we're dealing with facts. So we're moving facts and truth and evidence around to construct an analysis, a framework to look at the society, to judge the society. But intellectuals often fall into the temptation, educated people, of assuming that the constructed framework is real. But it's not, it's fiction. It's not real, it's fiction. You created it. Or someone else created it and you adopted it. It's not real. It's fiction. But in academia, we call it nonfiction. But it's not really nonfiction, really, because reality is what we see and feel with five senses. Anything outside of that is not reality per se, right? Only thing you can be 100% sure of is what you see, what you feel, what you smell, what you taste, what you touch. That's what you can be absolutely sure of. Anything outside is secondary. You cannot be sure of it. And therefore, it is fiction. It's not real, right? It's not 100% real. There's an element of fiction. So, I want to challenge all the academics out there. And, as you know, Arlington has a lot of people with master's degree. And if you have a master's degree, you're an expert in that area. I mean, you're a lower level expert because you're a master's level, but you're still an expert because most of the world moves around by master's degrees, like whether you're MBA or, MPH, which is a Master of Public Health. So most of the world is moving around by master's level experts. Because doctoral level experts are too theoretical as to really be useful in society. They're in universities researching. But in society, most of the experts operate at the level of master's level. Because they're not too theoretical. They're still they're kind of grounded, or hopefully they are. So I appeal to the intellectuals and educated out there to understand that the models that you use, whether the terminology is social justice, human rights, these are all fiction. They're not real. You created it. It's like creating like anything. You could create Narnia, Chronicles of Narnia, right? C.S. Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia. It's a fictional world. You could create Harry Potter's world, and J.K. Rowling is a genius, right? Her story just fascinates everybody, and it's almost a real world for many people. But these are all fiction, right? But you recognize them as fiction because you put a label on it. It's a fiction. So you've separated labels that are fiction from nonfiction, and you categorize it in the Aristotelian fashion, right? Speciation. So you create species, right? You divide things into categories, and then you understand things through categories, right? So you have said, well, stories like Harry Potter is a fiction, not real. Narnia in Chronicles Narnia is a fiction. It's not real because it's the fiction genre, and that's what we do in university. This is why I say universities are useless, because it trains you to think in categories, acceptable categories, but it limits you because you're imprisoned by those categories. That's why people who actually move the world are rarely academics, because academics create a prison of their own and they live inside that prison that they created. And they think that it's not a prison. Do you see what I'm saying? So movers and shakers of history have rarely been academics. Because academics, they serve people who are movers or shakers of history, like Napoleon, Alexander the Great, Donald Trump. They're not academics, but they're movers and shakers of history. Academics serve them, right? Because academics create categories and think that they're real when they're not. So they become imprisoned in their own categories, which are constructions, and by definition, not real, or what I call fiction. But obviously, you're getting confused by the terminology fiction because you are operating from the standard definition that fiction is not real, nonfiction is real. But history, which is nonfiction, is not real because somebody constructed that story based on evidence, and 80% of it is probably not true. You see what I'm saying? In terms of five senses. But obviously, historians, what are they going to do? Say that what they do is not real? You know what I'm saying? So they lie to themselves, and they put themselves in a prison called historiography, discipline of history, and say, well, we tell the history, and it's a fact. When in fact, it's not really fact. It's story. It's fiction. Or his story, like fiction, that has been constructed based on facts. But so part of it may be true, but you don't know which part's true and which part's not true. And so obviously there are degrees of that. Uh, but because we are not all seeing God, all knowing God, no one can construct a reality using pieces of facts that's very accurate. I mean, it's maybe a little bit accurate, but not very accurate. And so, and that's why, you're in this cycle of hell, like Jewish intellectuals, because they think they mastered the level where they could actually change the majority. And they convince themselves, all I have to do is use the term human rights. All I have to do is use the term social justice. All I have to do is change this law. All I have to do is write this book, But they fail to remember the intellectuals are less than 1% of the population. Reality happens every second. And it's humanly impossible to keep up with reality because only way you're going to experience reality is only in the present through the five senses. And because you're a finite human being, you can only experience reality with your five senses in a limited space. And you can only speak conclusively about that space where you inhabit, where you can assess through your five senses. You can't really know what's not experienced by you personally. You can only know secondhand, which by definition is fiction because you don't know what they're telling you is true or not, right? I mean, and even if they think they're telling the truth, maybe they're explaining it in a way that distorts the truth. So in the field of communication, you have the receiver error, and you have receiver error, meaning the person listening could make the mistake and misunderstand certain elements of it. Or you could have the sender error, meaning the person who's speaking may use wrong terminology that could skew the understanding, or the sender may send the wrong message for whatever reason. Maybe he's and he could do that intentionally or falsely. So there's intentional and accidental or inadvertent errors in sending and receiving, and there can be problem in the transmission stage as well. So there are a lot of factors involved. That is to say, you can approximate reality to a certain degree, but you could never actually hit reality. Only way once you start telling something, you have escaped reality because now by definition, you're secondary, right? Primary is senses, what you see, what you smell, what you hear, what you touch. Can you honestly explain what you touch accurately? No. You know what you're feeling, but you can't explain it. You see what I'm saying? Try it. Touch the table. Now explain what you feel. I don't care if you have 5 PhDs, you can't explain it accurately. And what you think you're explaining, the receiver will not necessarily understand it in the same way. So this is the best way to understand human experience. Much of human experience is living in the fictional realm. And that's why Plato said, we live in the shadows. We don't really know the reality. We only get glimpses of the reality. And so there's a profound truth in that. And that's why Plato has been timeless, because people who think about reality on an existential and epistemological level, existential meaning the way you exist, epistemology meaning the way you know or seek to know, understand that there's really no way to verify anything conclusively. And that is the error of humanity, or the tragedy of humanity, because We're not God. Only God can see everything accurately, right? We can only see things partially. And that's why we're finite. We're not omniscient, all-knowing like God. We only can know what we can see or hear, which is limited. Because we can't hear everybody. And even if we could hear what everybody says, how are we going to synthesize that? You see what I'm saying? And so the only reality you're going to know is what you feel with your five senses. And so I would say much of academic exercise is futile, because 95% of what goes on at the university is inaccurate at a certain level. There are degrees of inaccuracies. But I can conclusively say 100% of what goes in university is fiction. Even biology, you think biologists are explaining things accurately in all its ramifications? It's fiction because they're trying to approximate the truth. So it is not the truth itself. And they're limited in terms of analysis. They're limited in terms of expression, verbal and written expression. They're limited because the language that they use may have limitations. So they're limited in many ways that's outside of their control. And so that is why you should not be surprised that people make fatal errors. Doesn't matter if they have 500 IQ. 150 is considered genius, right? It doesn't matter. You will never know the reality fully. Only thing you can know is what you yourself experience. And even there, your memory fades, distorts. Yes. Yeah, you don't remember everything you've seen, experienced accurately. Sometimes you put your own interpretation. So even a day after experiencing something, you're already living in a fictional world. Because the memory of what you experienced the day before, you're not remembering it accurately. You've already fictionalized it. Based on your experience, based on your knowledge, based on series of events, based on forgetfulness. You know, and so the only thing that you could conclusively say is true is the Holy Bible. Because it was written down. And it's been the same. And that's why so many people have become Christians. Because they realize that that's the only truth. Everything else is not true. You see why we cannot coexist in the sense of this model? Because if you believe that the New Testament is true, then you have to believe its self-proclamation that Jesus is the only way to salvation, right? If you reject that, then you're rejecting the whole truth that the New Testament claims to be, right? So once you reject that fundamental proposition that Jesus is the only way to salvation, that the gospel itself proclaims, you've rejected the whole theme contained in that book. And so that's why Christians in America, over 200 million, they believe the Bible is true. Because human beings need a reference point. And the more people experience, they realize the reference points that they have are untenable. And so that's why brilliant people after brilliant people end up trusting the Bible as the only sure anchor to understanding reality. And that's why true Christians cannot believe in this coexist model. You know, every true Christian rejects it. And I would say even people who don't seriously think about it, they reject it. I mean, I say if you do a case study of any 10 people in America anywhere who identify themselves as Christian, they will reject that model. All 10 probably will reject that model. If you, like you could say, is everybody all religions the same? They'll say yes. And then you ask a series of questions in a case study to ascertain what they really think. Now, think about this. Why would they say yes? Because number one, maybe they think that's the answer you want them to give you, right? A lot of polls are wrong because people give you the answer you want. It's kind of like surveys or questions that you answer when you apply for a job. There's always a part of you that like, man, what does a test giver want me to say, right? That's always in the back of your mind when you're taking a test, right? So, and even when you're trying to answer things honestly, sometimes even inadvertently you're influenced by the fact that it is a test, right? And researchers have identified that as a threat to internal validity, right? If the test taker is aware that he is taking a test, that could threaten the internal validity of the study. And polls obviously are explicitly saying it's kind of like a test to see what you. So people are going to be influenced by that. So every people who take a poll are influenced by the fact that they're taking a poll, right? So every poll, to a certain extent, is not valid because there's threat to internal validity. So you have like double-blinded studies trying to reduce threat to internal validity, right? And even there, they know they're in some kind of experiment. So that itself can be a threat to internal validity. That's why you cannot trust any polls, really. I mean, you could trust it, but it could be wrong. I mean, it could be accurate, it could not be accurate. It's highly unreliable. They say the margin error is 6%, but probably not correct. And there's also the fact that people's minds change. So they might have felt this way now, but 1 hour later, they may feel completely differently about something. So people are not static, they're fluid, they're plastic, people change their thoughts based on who they talk to, based on what they see, what they hear, what they read, what they remember. Memory can reorient their perception of reality or their perception of what is right or wrong. You cannot trust anything. That's why academics make serious errors because they think like their constructs are real. They're not real. They're fiction. And I think this is, a good assessment of why Jews keep getting killed throughout 2,000 years by the Gentiles. There's three things that happen among the Jews in diaspora. Number one is they truly want to believe. You know how, like, when you like a girl, you want to believe that she likes you? Have you ever been in that situation? Most guys have. You like a girl and you want to believe that she likes you too. So you actually think that. And you actually believe it. But she doesn't really care about you at all. These things happen to a lot of guys. And often Jews think that too. Like, Jews in Germany thought their Jewish, like, Gentile friends really loved them. But they called the police on them and sent them to concentration camps. People that they've known for 40 years as good friends. And they're like, the death itself wasn't as painful as the betrayal of friends that they had for 40 years. And they're like, how did that happen? And you know what I say to that? Julius Caesar. His own best friend stabbed him to death at Tu Brute. You know, you never really know anyone, first of all, and you can never trust anyone. Those are two things that's certain in life, you know? And that's why I say you can only trust God. You can't even trust your own daughter, President Trump. Um, you may think you could trust her because you love her, parents, but, you know, how do you know she wants you to become the president? How do you know? Maybe she doesn't want you to be the president. Maybe Ivanka Trump thinks like, oh, 4 years is enough. Dad, it's time to move on. Who knows? You don't know. Obviously, I want you, President Trump, to become president because I want to bring America back to God. So I'd like to do it with you. Let's bring America back to God together. But because you seem like you want to do that. I mean, but you could change, obviously, too. But yeah, but you see what I'm saying. And so it's better to ground yourself in the Bible because everything else is sinking sand, literally. There's no one you can trust. You have control of nothing. You need to accept that. Let go and let God, as I say. Let go and let God. Makes you happier. You know, I hope all the Jews in America convert to Christianity because that's the only true religion. I mean, you be happier. You have joy unspeakable. Martin Lloyd Jones wrote a book, Joy Unspeakable. Yeah, I mean, it's just, you have to be a true Christian to know what that means. To know that you are a child of God. Yeah, I mean, I feel sorry for the Jews because they've repeated the cycle again and again for 2,000 years, and they're repeating it here in America. So it's tragic. It's tragic. But what can you do? But anyway, I hope you enjoy this show. I try to bring different content every day to entertain you and also give you guidance and information that can help you survive COVID-19 and other things that happen while COVID-19 is happening. Obviously, you're a free agent. You can do what you want. I give you some advice. I think those are good advice that I'm giving you, but you can reject them, accept them. You're not a slave. You're free to do what you want. So, but yeah, so I provide this show as a public service. I provide it in the tradition of Georgetown University, which is a Jesuit university, what they call cura personalis, which I adopt. Cura personalis basically relates to treating the whole person, not just the body, not just the mind, not just the intellect, like everything, spiritual, emotional, cultural, social, educational, everything. So I try to provide that in this show. And that's why you're realizing that there's no show like this in the world. And obviously you you assess correctly because I'm the Leonardo da Vinci of 21st century. There's like nobody like me in the world right now. And for 500 years, I'm like one of a kind. So you're very blessed and fortunate that I created this show for you and provide you with an experience that can come once every 500 years. You're very lucky that you live in my generation, and you are able to see this show. Obviously, everybody can see this show around the world, all 7 billion people. And so you're very blessed because internet is available even in poor countries. Um, yeah, you're very blessed. That's God's gift to you that you can watch me and learn from me, the Leonardo da Vinci of 21st century. But anyhow, I hope you survive COVID-19 and everything else that happens because COVID-19 is the only thing that's happening. But the probability is probably you may not. I'm predicting at least 30 million Americans die by year 2022 from COVID-19 and other related factors. But COVID-19, I'm just putting it on the umbrella of COVID-19. And I think I'm accurate. But let's see. Um, but yeah, I created the show to help you survive. I'm predicting that 5 to 10 of my core members will die because they're nurses. If they work in a hospital, there's a high chance they're going to die during the flu season. So 5 to 10 people are going to die from my core, unfortunately, by Christmas. I hope not, but I'm just being realistic. Um, yeah, so I want to do a cheer. Yeah, I mean, because, they may die by Christmas. I mean, what do they have? They have at least Heerak's cheer, right? This is my gift to you, the cheer. You'll be in that, ICU room, and you'll remember my cheer, and that may keep you going, and you may just survive because of that. Yeah, memory is important. That's why I tell you to create positive memories for your children. Yeah, a lot of soldiers say it's the memory of their wife that kept them alive in a war, when they were injured. Yeah, I mean, doctors don't know how to quantify that, how memory works. But a lot of people who survive because of some memory that kept them going. Yeah, so I'm going to do a cheer. This is my gift to you. CNL 2020, CNL, Georgetown University, CNL. We are paying, yay! And hopefully all of you passed your CNL exam. I passed on Monday. Hopefully all of you pass. So give me a 5 on passing CNL exam. Hopefully all of us pass. Yeah. So I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And I want to remind you, don't believe in the liberal media. They will lead you astray. Yeah. So I'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And I hope that you will be well and that your children will be well too. Bye.